thank you both for that background, 30,000-foot view explanation. I want to talk a little bit about and move from big picture into what this actually looks like in day-to-day decisions and pipelines. And so a little bit of AI in real cell and gene therapy programs. And so, Tim, my question for you is, if you could talk to us a little bit about, maybe provide a concrete example where an AI model, just in your experience or perhaps at Senti, meaningfully changed a program decision, and what did that change look like operationally for you and your teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me provide a little bit of context so I can sort of explain how we use it in this example. So at Senti, one of the things we're trying to do is design cell therapies to be, quote unquote, more intelligent at differentiating cancer cells versus healthy cells. So one of the big challenges we see in oncology treatment in general is you basically are looking for targets. Traditionally, you're looking for targets that are only on the cancer cells, and you want to direct some sort of killing against that target, right? Whether it's through an ADC or a T-cell engager or something like that. The field's been looking for these clean targets for quite a long time. Obviously, you can find them. HER2 is an example of a target like that's pretty clean, where you can go in and kill cells that express that target and get enough of a therapeutic window to see an effect. However, there are many cancers for which that's not the case, where you can't find a clean target that's only on the cancer cell, not on the healthy cells. And so in those situations, we really want to take advantage of the fact that cell therapies can be, quote unquote, more intelligent and more specific in terms of the decision making. So what we did is designed a cell that actually can recognize multiple cancer targets that are on the cancer cell and trigger killing. But at the same time, they could recognize healthy cells and protect those healthy cells from being killed. And so the way we do that is essentially we've built a pair of CAR receptors. One of those is an activating CAR that, again, recognizes cancer targets and kills. So that needs to trigger killing in your CAR T or CAR NK cell. And the second receptor you have to design is the inhibitory CAR. And the goal of that inhibitory CAR is to recognize the healthy cell and protect the healthy cell. Now, as you can imagine, this is a difficult engineering challenge because you need to balance the activating CAR and the inhibitory CAR together. If the activating CAR is too strong, it's going to kill and never be shut off. If the inhibitory CAR is too strong, it's going to inhibit all the time and never be able to be turned on. So you have to really balance a pair of what we call ACAR and ICARs together. If you were to take this in a sort of a traditional design paradigm, you would go through and manually create different ACARs, different ICARs. But as you can imagine, the design space is very large here. You have the binder for the targets, you have the transmembrane domain, you have the hinge domains, and then importantly, you have the intracellular signaling domains, which in the case of the ACARs, you would try to design activating signaling motifs. And in the case of the inhibitory or ICAR, you want the inhibitory signaling motifs. And the design space is essentially infinite, if you think, practically infinite, if you think about all the potential, modules that you might insert into this. So, we have established a very high throughput design approach where we can essentially build large pooled libraries, 100,000 or more different variants of activating and inhibitory CARs, and we can screen for, are they working in the desired context? But even that is insufficient to exhaustively cover the entire design space. So what we did is actually went through some of these really high throughput screens and collected data on which ACARs and which ICAR pairs worked well together and which did not work well together. And that positive and negative data is actually really important. And then we ended up training a model on that data to then suggest what would be next rounds of designs that could actually perform better. And so the AI models that were trained there are actually very helpful in doing two things. One is, basically providing a way of synthesizing all of that information together. And two, in suggesting designs that a human designer may not have come up with by itself. And we ended up coming up with specific ACAR and ICARs that significantly outperform the previous human designs using that sort of approach. And that was very helpful in terms of accelerating our timelines to picking that lead candidate, number one. But I would say two is also allowing us to reach levels of performance that we just didn't have the ability to achieve through manual design in the past. I think our R&D teams were actually very excited to see that information come out. Number one, it was, I think, intellectually satisfying that the effort that was undertaken to generate those large data sets did actually pay off into better designs. And two, it actually allowed them and allowed the company as a whole to achieve a product that was potentially much better than what we could design manually on its own. So that's one example where an AI model has actually significantly changed a program that was under development for Senti.
Excellent. That's really detailed. So thank you for that, Tim. I do want to address a comment that came in from Julia. We do not have any slides, so you're not missing anything, so don't worry. It's just this panelists presenting information. We do have the poll questions though, but no slides for this one. And to remind our audience to please submit questions as you think of them. We would love to answer them for you. In the meantime, Claire, my question for you is, for the CEOs and the heads of R&D who are with us today, what questions should they be asking internally among their teams to distinguish that we have a superficial marketing style presentation of AI versus AI is actually influencing these go, no-go portfolio decisions?
This is a great question following up on what Tim just said. Right now, everybody wants that buzzword, and people have often one of two reactions to that buzzword. Either very much AI is hype. We've been through this before with other things that were going to revolutionize biology. I don't believe any of it. Or like it's going to change everything, and we're not going to need wet labs anymore, and we're just going to, make and design drugs in the computer. And those are kind of the two extremes. And the middle is where the actual value is, and where I think people should be thinking. I don't think CEOs and heads of R&Ds need to be afraid of it, but they need to think about how do they use it in a way that actually does give you an actionable decision. I often think about things, whatever tool you're using, and AI to me is just a tool, just like any new technology that comes out, whether it's a wet lab machinery. You think about when PCR and flow cytometry became more popular and how that changed the way you design experiments. This is just something to change the way you design and do experiments. It's not at a place where it can replace wet labs yet. And so Tim had a great example of a use case. That's what I always want to understand when I'm talking to CEOs and companies that I work with. What is your use case for this tool? And is it the right tool for that use case? Oftentimes people think it's going to solve things that it's not able to solve yet. Potentially one day it will get there. And so his example of being able to design all of these different cell circuits, I think that's the same as designing your different vectors and allowing you to look at a larger design space and then use that information to take it into the wet lab and validate it and iterate on your model. I think you use that original data to inform the next set of experiments, and then you have to go back to your model and see if it gave you actionable information that was not just a reflection of what it was trained on. And so those are the things, the idea that it's going to eliminate the need for wet lab validation is, not what actually is going to happen. But the idea, as Tim says, that it can accelerate it and it can make what it is you're looking for when you're drawing from a larger design space more optimized, a better therapeutic. And when you talk about some of these therapeutics that have complicated manufacturing processes, pretty meaningful, severe adverse events, like having the best drug to go into the patient so that you can potentially minimize some of those downstream negative effects, whether it's affecting cost of goods or those adverse events that might happen once you get into patients. Those are the kind of use cases that I think are very practical and useful to use these tools for. But again, it's still just a tool to apply to a particular question and allow you to look at a bigger world of opportunity.